Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Graham Bennett woke up that March Sunday to the smell of burnt pancakes. He jumped out of bed, threw on his robe, and ran down to the kitchen, where he found Tessa trying to salvage what was left of the charred batter while their 5-year-old son, Lucas, stared wide-eyed from his high chair. Graham turned off the stove, opened the windows to let out the smoke, and looked at his wife with a tired smile. Tessa's eyes were wet, not from the cooking disaster, but from something deeper that Graham couldn't yet name. He walked over, kissed her forehead, and said he'd handle it from now on. After all, it was his day off, the only day of the week the restaurant closed, and the only day he could give his full attention to his family. Graham made perfect pancakes in 15 minutes, topping them with fresh fruit and a drizzle of honey, just the way Lucas loved them. The boy ate enthusiastically, oblivious to the quiet tension hanging between his parents. Tessa barely touched her portion, pushing the pieces around her plate with her fork, her gaze lost somewhere beyond the kitchen window. Graham Bennett was 36 and the executive chef at Ambrosia, a restaurant that had earned regional recognition over the past 3 years. His path there hadn't been easy. He started as a kitchen helper at 18, worked in mediocre places, endured tyrannical chefs and 16-hour shifts. He studied culinary arts at night while working days. At 28, he finally landed a sous chef position at a respected establishment. That's where he met Tessa, who had been hired to photograph the new menu. She was 25, with wavy brown hair, amber eyes, and a laugh that filled any room. Graham fell in love before he even spoke a word to her. Tessa was a freelance photographer specializing in food and still life. She had real talent, an artistic eye that turned simple dishes into works of art through her lens. They married 2 years after meeting, in a quiet ceremony in her parents' garden. Lucas was born 3 years after the wedding, completing what Graham believed was a perfectly built life. But that March Sunday, as he washed the breakfast dishes and listened to Lucas playing with his toy cars in the living room, Graham realized something was off. Tessa had gone upstairs claiming a headache and hadn't come back down. He dried his hands on the dish towel and climbed the stairs. He found her sitting on the edge of the bed, clutching her phone with both hands, fingers trembling. When she noticed him, she quickly stuffed the phone into her jeans pocket. Graham pretended not to notice. He asked if she wanted him to make some tea. She shook her head and said she needed to talk to him about something important. The tone of her voice made Graham sit in the armchair by the corner of the room, the same chair where he used to read stories to Lucas before bed. Tessa took a deep breath and began to speak. She said she loved them both, him and Lucas, but felt they were slipping away in the routine. Graham worked 60 hours a week at the restaurant, sometimes more during busy seasons. When he got home, he was exhausted, smelling of garlic and onions, his feet aching from standing all day. Tessa understood his dedication, respected his passion for cooking, but felt the marriage was slowly dying, suffocated by incompatible schedules and shallow conversations about bills and Lucas's school schedule. She proposed something she'd read about in articles on marital health: time apart. 3 weeks, specifically. Enough time for individual reflection without being so long it created permanent distance. During that time, she'd stay at her best friend Rachel's house, and they'd have space to miss each other, remember why they fell in love, appreciate what they had. When they reunited, the longing would reignite the flame. Graham listened in silence, his hands clasped in his lap. When she finished, he asked just one question: why exactly 3 weeks? Tessa answered without hesitation: it was the period recommended by the specialists she'd consulted. Not too short to be meaningless, not too long to cause irreversible damage. Graham nodded slowly. Part of him wanted to argue, to say they could fix things together, that he could cut back his hours at the restaurant, that they didn't need separation to reconnect. But Tessa's look held a determination he rarely saw. She'd already decided. Graham agreed to the time. The following Monday, Tessa packed her bags. 2 large suitcases, actually, which seemed excessive for 3 weeks. She explained she needed different clothes for varying weather and occasions, in case Rachel invited her to social events. Graham helped her load the suitcases into the trunk of her car and said goodbye with a kiss on the forehead. Lucas asked why Mommy was taking so many things. Tessa knelt down, hugged her son, and told him she'd be back before he even noticed, that it was just a short trip. The boy waved as her car pulled away down the tree-lined street. Graham stood on the porch for long minutes after the vehicle disappeared around the corner. Something didn't fit. The precision of the timeline, the amount of luggage, how quickly she'd organized everything. It felt too planned, too rehearsed. That same night, after putting Lucas to bed, Graham called Victor Mendez, a private investigator who'd helped his brother through a complicated divorce 2 years earlier. Victor was discreet, efficient, and expensive, but he delivered results. Graham briefly explained the situation. Wife asked for space, said she'd stay with a friend. He suspected something more. Victor said he'd start the next day. Graham transferred the advance payment and hung up with sweaty hands. He felt guilty for doubting Tessa, but his gut screamed that something was deeply wrong. The first report came on Wednesday. Victor had followed Tessa since Monday. She wasn't at Rachel's house. In fact, Victor confirmed Rachel was traveling abroad for work and wouldn't return for a month. Tessa had rented a room at a charming inn on the outskirts of town, a bucolic place surrounded by gardens and nature trails, popular with artists and photographers. The place was called Refuge of the Arts. Graham's stomach clenched reading that. But worse was yet to come. Victor's report noted Tessa wasn't alone at the inn. She'd enrolled in an intensive landscape photography workshop led by Adam Reeves. Graham knew that name. Tessa had spoken of Adam with near-reverent admiration for years. Adam Reeves was an internationally renowned photographer, specializing in wild landscapes, with work published in prestigious magazines and exhibitions in art galleries around the world. He ran exclusive workshops in different locations, charging high fees for the experience of learning directly from him. Tessa had always wanted to attend one of these workshops, but the costs were prohibitive and the dates never matched her schedule. Until now, apparently. The second report arrived on Saturday. Victor had gained access to the inn's common areas disguised as a guest interested in booking the space for a corporate event. The photos attached to the report made Graham spill his coffee onto the kitchen table. Tessa and Adam walking side by side along a trail, shoulders touching. Tessa and Adam sitting together at dinner at the inn, sharing a bottle of wine, heads tilted toward each other in intimate conversation. Tessa and Adam in the garden at dusk, him holding her hand as he pointed toward the horizon, probably explaining some lighting technique. Her smiles were wide, genuine, the kind Graham hadn't seen in months. Victor also included details about Adam. The photographer was 42, married for 8 years to a woman named Diane, had 3 young children living with his wife in another state. Adam traveled constantly for workshops and photography projects, spending more time away from home than present. The third report came on Tuesday of the second week. The photos were more explicit now. Tessa and Adam kissing in the inn's parking lot, leaning against his car. Tessa leaving Adam's room at 6 a.m., clothes wrinkled, hair messy. Adam opening his door for Tessa at night, a bottle of champagne in hand. Victor also discovered Tessa had signed up for the workshop 4 months earlier. 4 months. She'd planned this with surgical precision. The workshop lasted exactly 3 weeks, starting on the Monday she left home and ending the Sunday before she'd promised to return. The coincidence was mathematically impossible to be accidental. Graham read each report alone, late at night, after Lucas was asleep. During the day, he kept up the routine, took his son to school, worked at the restaurant, made dinner, gave Lucas a bath, read stories before bed. His team at Ambrosia noticed he was quieter than usual, more introspective. The sous chef asked if everything was okay. Graham said he was just going through a rough patch at home. He didn't elaborate. At night, he lay in the empty bed, staring at the ceiling, mentally replaying every sign he'd ignored over the past few months. The times Tessa stayed on her phone late, saying she was talking to clients about projects. The weekends she went out on photo sessions that lasted all day. The excessive excitement when she mentioned new workshops and trends in photography. The way her eyes lit up when she spoke about certain photographers, especially Adam Reeves. Graham had attributed it all to her passion for her profession. Now he saw the passion was for something else. Or rather, for someone else. The final report arrived on Saturday of the third week, one day before Tessa's scheduled return. Victor had documented nearly every day of the past 20. The evidence was undeniable: photos, short videos, time logs, testimonies from in-staff Victor had discreetly interviewed. Tessa and Adam had spent the 3 weeks living as a couple. They had coffee together every morning, worked side by side during workshop activities, ate lunch alone while the others grouped together, dined by candlelight, slept together every night. In-staff assumed they were married. One even told Victor he'd never seen a couple so in love, always holding hands, always exchanging knowing glances. Graham paid Victor the remaining balance and thanked him for his work. Then he sat at the kitchen table and cried for the first time in years. He didn't cry just from sadness, but from anger, humiliation, deep disappointment. The woman he loved, the one he'd built a life and a child with, had lied elaborately, planned meticulously, and treated him like a convenient fool who'd take care of the house and the child while she lived out her romantic fantasy with a married man. On Sunday afternoon, Tessa sent a message saying she'd arrive around 6. Graham replied he'd be waiting. He spent the day preparing. Not a special dinner, like he would have under other circumstances. He prepared a large brown envelope, organizing chronologically every photo, every report, every piece of evidence Victor had gathered during those 3 weeks. Lucas was staying with his paternal grandparents for the weekend. Graham had arranged that in advance, telling them he and Tessa needed some time alone to talk about the experience of the temporary separation. His parents understood and were happy to have the grandson for one more day. At 6:15, Graham heard Tessa's car pull into the garage. He was sitting in the living room, the envelope on his lap, a cup of cold coffee on the coffee table. The door opened and Tessa walked in carrying only one small suitcase. She'd left the others in the car, probably planning to unpack slowly. Her face was sun-kissed, her eyes bright, a wide smile on her lips. She looked years younger, radiant in a way Graham hadn't seen in a long time. Tessa set the suitcase down in the hallway and walked toward him, arms open for a hug. Graham stayed seated. Her smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. She sat on the sofa opposite him and began to speak. She said the time apart had been transformative. That she'd had the chance to deeply reflect on their marriage, on her own desires and needs, on the future she wanted to build. She said she missed him and Lucas so much, that every day away made her realize how much she valued the family they had. She talked about how Rachel had been a wonderful host, providing space and support for her journey of self-discovery. She mentioned long walks alone, morning meditation, reading about healthy relationships. She said she was now ready to truly invest in the marriage, to be a better wife, more present, more connected. Graham listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When she finally stopped speaking, he handed her the envelope. Tessa looked at the object with curiosity, then at him, searching for an explanation. Graham said just one word: open. Tessa opened the envelope with hesitant fingers. The first photo fell into her lap. It was her and Adam, passionately kissing in the inn's garden. Color drained instantly from her face. She flipped through the other photos frantically, each one more incriminating than the last. Tessa in Adam's room. Adam holding her hand at dinner. The two walking arm in arm along the trail. Her face lost every trace of the radiant composure she'd shown minutes earlier. Graham watched every reaction, every flash of panic in her eyes. When Tessa finished looking at all the photos, she lifted her head to him, mouth open, speechless. Graham stayed silent, waiting. Tessa finally found her voice. It was trembling, defensive. She said he had no right to spy on her, that he'd violated her privacy, that this was an absurd invasion. Graham calmly replied she'd violated something far more sacred. Tessa changed tactics. She said she couldn't be blamed for anything that happened during those 3 weeks. After all, they were taking a break, technically separated, free to make individual choices. She'd proposed the time, he'd agreed. Each of them had the freedom to explore, to find themselves, to live experiences they deemed necessary. What happened with Adam was part of her journey of self-discovery, not a betrayal per se. Graham tilted his head slightly, as if considering her argument. Then he spoke, voice low and controlled. He said she was absolutely right. That the time apart allowed each of them to make their own choices freely. And that he'd made his own. He pulled from the envelope a document Tessa hadn't noticed before, hidden among the photos. It was the divorce papers, already filled out and signed by him. Tessa grabbed the documents with violently shaking hands. She read the first lines and let the pages fall to the floor. She began to cry, saying he couldn't do this, that she loved him, that Adam meant nothing, that it had been just a slip, a passing fantasy. Graham remained motionless. He said fantasies aren't planned 4 months in advance. That slips don't last 3 full weeks. That love doesn't include elaborate lies and calculated betrayals. Tessa stood up, walked over to him, and knelt beside his armchair. She gripped his hands, begging. She said they'd do couples therapy, that she'd never see Adam again, that she'd dedicate every day to rebuilding his trust. Graham gently pulled his hands away. He said trust takes years to build and seconds to destroy. That he couldn't spend the rest of his life questioning every trip she took, every text message, every photography workshop. That Lucas deserved parents who respected each other, even if separated, not a marriage poisoned by distrust and resentment. Tessa stood up unsteadily. She picked up her phone and dialed a number Graham recognized as one of her frequent contacts. She put it on speaker, her hands trembling too much to hold the phone to her ear. After a few rings, a male voice answered. It was Adam. Tessa began speaking rapidly, saying Graham had found out everything, that he had photos of them together, that he was filing for divorce. She said she needed his help, that they needed to decide what to do now that everything had come out. There was a long silence on the other end. When Adam finally responded, his voice was cold, almost impatient. He said he was sorry for her situation, but he couldn't get involved. That the workshop had ended and he was already back home, with his wife and children. That what had happened between them was an intense experience, limited to those 3 weeks, nothing more. He wished her luck and hung up. Tessa stared at the silent phone for long seconds, her face shattered. Graham then pulled out one last photo from the envelope. It was an image Victor had captured on the last day of the workshop, when Graham had asked the detective to document Adam's movements too. The photo showed Adam in the inn's garden, minutes before leaving. He was passionately kissing a young woman, another participant in the same workshop. She couldn't have been more than 22, with blonde hair and a dazzling smile. Victor had investigated and found Adam had a pattern of affairs at nearly every workshop he taught. Different cities, different women, the same pattern. He used his status as a renowned artist to seduce admiring participants, kept intense affairs during the 3-week course, then moved on to the next workshop and the next conquest. His wife probably didn't know, or maybe she did and accepted it in exchange for the comfortable life his success provided. Either way, Tessa was just another name on a list that must have been long. Tessa collapsed onto the sofa, her crying turning into violent sobs. She muttered that she couldn't believe it, that Adam had told her she was special, different from the others, that they had a profound artistic connection. Graham felt something he hadn't expected, pity. Not for her exactly, but for the pathetic illusion she'd built. She'd destroyed their marriage, risked her son's stability, lied elaborately for months, all for a man who wouldn't even remember her last name next week. Graham stood up. He said the divorce papers were in order, that his lawyer would contact her on Monday to discuss terms. He intended to seek shared custody of Lucas, wanted to keep things civil for the sake of the child. She could stay in the house for now, until they decided on asset division. He picked up a suitcase he'd prepared earlier and walked toward the door. Tessa lifted her tear-streaked face and asked where he was going. Graham replied he'd stay in the apartment above the restaurant for now, he had everything he needed there. She begged him to stay, to talk more, that it couldn't end like this. Graham paused at the door, not turning around. He said it had already ended 4 months ago, when she signed up for the workshop. She just hadn't noticed. He left and closed the door behind him. 3 months later, the divorce was finalized. Graham secured shared custody of Lucas, with the boy spending most of his time with him. Tessa didn't contest it, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps knowing she'd lose either way. She kept the house, he kept most of their savings and his full share of the restaurant. Victor, the detective, had provided enough documentation for Graham's lawyer to negotiate favorable terms. Tessa tried contacting Adam a few times in the following months, but he never replied. She found out through mutual acquaintances that he was teaching another workshop in a different city, likely charming another admiring participant with his stories of travel and artistic gaze. 6 months after the divorce, Graham was in the Ambrosia kitchen on a Saturday night, leading his team during a busy service. Lucas was sleeping peacefully in the apartment above, where Graham had set up a bedroom specially for his son, with blue-painted walls and shelves filled with toy cars and books. The restaurant was packed, every table full, the satisfying hum of lively conversation and cutlery against plates filling the space. Graham felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, peace. Not exuberant happiness, not dramatic relief, just a deep calm of someone who'd survived a storm and found safe harbor. That same Saturday, Tessa was alone in the house they'd once shared. She'd tried returning to photography, but her focus was shattered. Clients had dwindled, her reputation in professional circles tarnished by the inevitable gossip. She constantly checked her phone, waiting for messages that never came. She thought about Adam often, not with love or longing, but with burning shame. She'd become exactly what she'd vowed never to be, a woman discarded by a man who never valued her. When she closed her eyes, she saw Graham's condescending smile the day he showed her the photo of Adam kissing another woman. It wasn't a smile of triumph or revenge. It was worse. It was the smile of someone who simply didn't care anymore. Graham never spoke about the divorce to anyone beyond what was necessary. When friends or family asked what happened, he simply said it didn't work and changed the subject. He felt no need to expose Tessa or seek validation. The truth was enough for him. Lucas adjusted to the new routine with the impressive resilience of children. He loved the days with his dad at the restaurant, helping decorate dishes with mint leaves, tasting broths with small spoons, watching the cooks work in perfect sync. On days with his mother, he was quieter, sensing her sadness without fully understanding it. A year after the divorce, Graham met someone. He didn't seek it, didn't plan it, it simply happened. She was a wine supplier who visited the restaurant monthly. They started with professional conversations about flavor pairings, evolved into coffee during deliveries, then dinners outside of work. Her name was Elena, she was 34, divorced, no children, and had a smile that genuinely lit up her eyes. Graham didn't rush. He didn't repeat past patterns. He built something new with patience and absolute honesty. Tessa found out about the new relationship through mutual acquaintances. She felt a pang of something that might have been jealousy, but realized it was more envy than any lingering feeling for Graham. He had truly moved on, while she remained stuck in the same place, carrying the weight of a disastrous choice. She often thought about those 3 weeks that changed everything. 21 days of fantasy that cost a lifetime of reality. The workshop, the stolen kisses, the passionate nights with Adam, all now felt distant, like a fever dream that left only a hangover. She'd traded gold for painted brass, and the belated realization offered no comfort. Graham, on the other hand, rarely thought about those 3 weeks. When he did, it wasn't with bitterness, just a sober acknowledgement that it had been a necessary turning point. He learned to trust again, but differently. More cautious, more observant, more grounded in actions than words. Elena understood that without him having to explain in detail. She'd been hurt too, was rebuilding her ability to believe. Together, they walked slowly, but firmly. Lucas grew up watching a father who turned pain into dignity and a mother who turned illusion into regret. He learned, even at such a young age, that choices have consequences, and that truth, however painful, always outweighs comfort. When he was old enough to understand, Graham would explain only the essentials, that sometimes the people we love disappoint us, but that doesn't mean we should stop loving. It just means we must choose better where we place our trust. The restaurant Ambrosia continued to thrive. Graham invested his profits, expanded the menu, hired new talent. The place became known not just for exceptional food, but for the welcoming atmosphere Graham cultivated. Every dish that left his kitchen carried a piece of his journey, ingredients carefully selected, prepared with refined technique over time, presented with elegant simplicity. No excesses, no pretension, just honest quality. Exactly how Graham had rebuilt his life. Tessa never fully recovered her career or inner peace. The ghost of Adam Reeves haunted her not with longing, but with shame. She'd become exactly what she swore she'd never be, someone who sacrificed substance for superficiality, confused fleeting desire for deep love, dismissed loyalty for momentary excitement. The worst punishment didn't come from Graham, or the divorce, or the financial loss. It came from within, from the mirror she avoided looking into, from the question that hammered relentlessly, was it worth it? Graham never needed to answer that question for himself. His answer was in Lucas's smile when he tasted a new dish in the restaurant kitchen. It was in Elena's gaze when she came over for dinner after work. It was in the quiet of his nights, sleeping without the weight of doubts or suspicions. It was in the certainty that he'd chosen dignity when he could have chosen bitter revenge, that he'd chosen a fresh start when he could have chosen resentful stagnation. 3 weeks. 21 days. 504 hours. That was the time Tessa asked for to find herself, and the time Graham used to uncover the truth. Both found exactly what they were looking for, just not the way they expected. And perhaps that's the cruelest and fairest lesson of all. Time doesn't lie. People do. And when the lie comes to light, time is always the harshest judge. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.